I'm Bob Brill. He's Eric Kramer. Welcome to Kramer and Brill, an NFL fantasy football podcast. And each week, my co-host, former Bears and Lions quarterback Eric Kramer, and myself delve into your fantasy football choices and hopefully help you out on your way to victory. Well, the playoffs are well underway now. And you can find out more by going to our website, kramerandbrill.com, or on my Bob Brill YouTube channel. Well, with playoffs super underway, we made some right choices for you last week. And I should say you made some right choices. You were high on a couple of QBs who really came through. Jared Goff, for instance, led all quarterbacks, 355 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Joe Burrow and Gardner Minshew with almost the exact same stats, except for the interceptions. They threw some and Goff did not.
The other guy, or another guy I'd like to mention too, is Trevor Lawrence, who clearly, to me, has turned a corner. And then after all the speculation and the way the game ended prior to this coming week's big game against the Eagles, Dak Prescott came up huge. And, I mean, had probably his best game, maybe his career. And then the other guy that always flies under the radar and is less flashy than the rest is Daniel Jones, who probably had undoubtedly, I think, his best statistical game of the year and went toe-to-toe with the Vikings and Kirk Cousins. And then on the downside, though, again, is Deshaun Watson, who, he has yet to produce really anything close to an average good game.
You think, though, that that's kind of expected? I mean, you take almost 2 years off, and the speed of the game and your age and your legs, and no matter how hard you work out in the off season, it's not the same.
No, we talked about that, that this was predictable. And it's, unfortunately for him and the team, really, it's not gone well.
You were heavy on Cam Akers again. He scored 3 touchdowns, had over 100 yards rushing. Well, my pick of James Conner was also a good one. We both like Donta Foreman, 165 rushing, and Leonard Fournette, who caught 9 passes. Receivers, there are 10 of them over 100 yards, so we didn't miss much. Your emphasis on T. Higgins was strong, 128 on 8, and a touch was secure. At tight end, Hawkinson finally came through with that big game that we expected. You've been predicting him to have that for 2 years now. 13 catches, 109 yards, 2 touchdowns, gave him 35 fantasy points. Was to lead all receivers. Tyler Higbee and George Kittle were right behind him.
Well, for once this season, going backwards to the running backs, the Bills' offensive production had little to do with Josh Allen. It was actually the running tandem of Singletary and James Cook, who combined for over 200 yards rushing in a dominating second half. And then to go back to the tight ends, we haven't mentioned the Jags' Evan Ingram's much this year. And then here he pops out against the Jets for 7 catches and 113 yards. And as long as you mention former Lions tight end T.J. Hawkinson had in his great day against Minnesota, we ought to mention the one Lions tight end who has been picking up the slack, or at least this week, with all of Jared Goff's 3 touchdown passes going to Shane Zylstra. And then, and the receiver I'll mention for the Bengals is the one we've never heard of before, at least I haven't, Trenton Irwin, who's a big body, versatile receiver who came down with 2 of Joe Burrow's 3 touchdown passes.
The Broncos fired Nate Hackett as their head coach, 4-11 with Russell Wilson. Just didn't do the job. Mac Jones, he could be fined for a low hit on a cornerback. What? I mean, explain this one to me. I don't get this one.
All right. So this was that play where it gets ruled, in my opinion, wrongly as an incomplete pass. It was a fumble. Anyway, so as he's chasing down the guy who's got the ball and is outrunning him, who he has no shot of catching, he then peels back for a guy who's just running, which is a quarterback, and decides, I can't catch the guy who actually has the ball, so I'm going to take out and possibly end the career of the guy who's just running down the field, which is a complete, in my opinion, I think this answers basically he lived all week long with being embarrassed by getting shoved through the earth's crust on that last play of the Raiders game, and now he's going to go take someone else out in a very cowardly manner. In my opinion, this is not the first time Mac Jones has done something questionable. But this should there should be a rule instituted. You know how quarterbacks are so protected, where if you're a defensive player, I mean, the fine you get for possibly putting all your weight on him as he's going down, or all these other, there should be a new Mac Jones rule where you get fined, you get tossed out of the game, maybe for multiple games for pulling that kind of crap.
I think you're right. This is just one. I mean, it never happens, but because quarterbacks don't take on defensive players at ever, but you're right. There probably needs to be a rule to say you can't do this, just so there's a rule that says you can't do this in case somebody else wants to do it. Like,
well, when you throw an interception, all right, or somebody picks up, go tackle that guy.
Yeah.
Right? The guy with the ball, not somebody just running down the field that you peel back on who doesn't see you coming.
It's sort of like a rule that I'm surprised they haven't put in yet, which they may, but it hasn't happened yet in the pros. So the Kenny Pickett fake slide rule. I'm wondering when that's going to happen, because I think everybody saw in the last college football weekend of the year last year that he was running and was heading for the end zone, faked the slide. The defensive player backed off. He didn't slide. He kept on running and got a touchdown. And, Saturday, there was a comment about that between the announcers. We brought it up again. And I'm just kind of curious that they haven't come up with a rule yet saying you can't fake slide, because I don't know that there is one, right?
Well, I think you bring up a good point. But who got hurt on that play? Nobody.
Nobody,
so
right.
Here's what the NFL has instituted. You can't peel back block anymore.
Right.
You can't, as a cornerback or a defensive player, you can't cut the legs out from an offensive lineman who's coming out to block you. But yet, Mac Jones can do what he did and get and have zero consequences.
Yeah. No, I imagine the rules committee will face that sometime after the end of the season. But I think you put the right word on it, cowardly, and that's exactly what it was. Let's talk about Saturday. I wanted to mention this briefly. We after our last broadcast, we lost Franco Harris, which was so devastating. Just 4 days before the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Immaculate Reception, which started off really the keystone, the start of his career, and he passed away, and it was just suddenly, and everybody was in shock. And of course, everybody in Pittsburgh rallied around with the game coming up. They have to win these games. And of course, against the Raiders, they really want to win this game. And going past that, did Kenny Pickett show that he could have a nickname of Kenny Ice or Kenny Cool at some point in the near future? Because he didn't get all through that whole game, I was amazed at the nerves of steel this kid had as a rookie, and kind of move the ball back and forth. Nothing really happening. It's 4 degrees with the wind chill, and they get down there and they have to win with a touchdown within the last 45 or 48 seconds. And he moves the team down and throws the only touchdown that they're going to get in the game with about 46 seconds left. Yeah.
Right. I mean, so I agree with you, and you and I can probably give some thought to this, as I'm sure the whole city of Pittsburgh, on what his new nickname should be. But here's what impressed me about that game. The Steelers did what they absolutely had to do on the biggest non-Super Bowl night in that franchise's history in 50 years, is win the game. And then all week long, obviously not just week long, but year long, there's been this buildup to this particular game. And then it's an otherwise ugly game, frigid game. And then the guy who actually catches the ball and becomes immaculate and with the Immaculate Reception passes away prior to the game. And then here comes Kenny Pickett and has what I consider maybe the best game of his season so far on that night. And I think you're right. I think, for what he came up doing and basically saved that night for that franchise is amazing. And I think we can all tell that after the rocky start he had to the season, came back and then started playing the way veteran quarterbacks play. And that's just take what the defense gives you and do what you've been working your whole life to do. And that's use the ability you've been given, work hard to prepare, and all the things that people do to get better, he's done. And I think and to me, if I think, earned the respect of his teammates, the coaching staff, and the city of Pittsburgh that night.
I do too. And I thank you for saying that. And it was just, we couldn't ask for anything better. The score was almost the same as it was 50 years ago. It was the same amount of points scored. So.
Good point. Yep.
This is a big weekend for the NFL because a lot of teams are on the cusp. And a lot of teams will still be playing their key players, which is really important for fantasy, as we know, because this is fantasy football playoffs. And it's, for a lot of leagues, it's going to go into that final game, which normally it doesn't. And that's an important thing. So let's get right to the games. Go to Thursday night. We got the Cowboys and Titans. I'm saying pretty much start all the Cowboys here. And the only player for the Titans is Derrick Henry, and that's it.
Cowboys' name I think we have to start paying attention to is T.Y. Hilton. He only had the one catch, which was a big catch, 44, 45-yard catch up the left sideline. But as he's a veteran guy, very talented, fast, and as he starts to get familiar with this offense every week now, including this run into the playoffs and hopefully beyond, just a one-game entrance, is T.Y. Hilton, who, that could be the guy that helps. There's all this talk about Odell Beckham. Well, Odell Beckham came and went, and now enters the guy who I think could be a real difference maker.
He was a big player with his previous team, and just has been, had this time off. And now we talked last week. We all thought we didn't know where he was. We totally forgot about him. And here he comes in. He makes a big play. And I think you're right. I think he's got a really good chance to lead that team. Sunday, Cardinals and Falcons. I like Algieri and London here for the Falcons. And I only like Connor and Hopkins, along with Dortch, who's been coming along pretty much the last couple of weeks for the Cardinals.
I agree with you on nearly all the Cardinals you just named. McSorley at QB makes me a little nervous. And that's why I'm not high on Hopkins. I think he missed a few potential throws that could have gone his way. And when he did throw them, they were inaccurate. But Connor on the ground, I love because of his elusiveness and versatility as a receiver. I think are both underrated. And I especially like when they direct snap it to him. And Dortch is both a threat, not only on the end of passes, but also as a runner. And in Atlanta, I agree with you. The running back, Tyler Algieri's work and his workload and production has been on the rise. And rookie quarterback Desmond Ridder, didn't take long for him to figure out that Drake London is the Falcons receiver you have to pay attention to.
Yeah, he's going to be a good one for years to come. Bears and Lions, divisional game. Goff, St. Brown, and DJ Clark, and really just Kmet and Montgomery on the Bears for me.
I love saying this, that the Lions look like a contender, especially on offense. And don't forget about the tight ends who Goff specifically targets in the end zone. And for the Bears, please don't forget to start their number one weapon, Justin Fields.
Do you remember the last time the Lions went to the playoffs, who the quarterback was?
I do. and it's now time, right? It is way too long. I forget how many years ago that was. But
1991.
Yeah. But, that's the last time we won. We went a couple years later and lost to the
That's
Packers.
right. That's right, too.
In any event, you're right. I mean, the Lions, I think, have the look of a team that now offensively, defensively, they've been playing better, except for what happened last week in Carolina. So, I think this could be the comeback story of the decade, really.
Yeah.
To, kind of like in the same way that Justin Fields started out shaky and then has come on, the Lions, in the same way as a team, have done something very similar.
I'm going to make a prediction here. If the Lions make the playoffs, somebody I know's phone's going to start ringing off the hook.
We're going to throw a party, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right, let's take the Jags and Texans. Lawrence, as you mentioned earlier, Etienne, and Ingram has been really strong lately on the Jags. Just walk away from Houston. I don't even want to go there. Just leave that city down by itself. Just, whoever's on that team, just walk away.
in the last Jaguars 3 games, Ingram, who we just talked about, has had 7, 8, and 11 receptions. And so he's now becoming a focal point. You got Trevor Lawrence, who's now, like I talked about before, turned the corner and looks like a legit guy. And so Evan Ingram is actually one of his better targets. And so now they're facing the Texans defense, who just won and somehow and potentially are one win away from making the Chicago Bears have the first draft pick. So we'll see what happens there. But I think that this defense versus this offense, I love the Jaguars.
Broncos and Chiefs, Judy, if you got them, and any Chief you can get your hands on. And the Broncos, they're going to be in disarray.
They currently are and have been.
Yeah. I don't know who's coaching them this week. And then on top of that, they're coming off this 51 point embarrassment for the Rams. So it's I don't even know if I like Judy in this game. I like Judy only because I felt like I had to pick somebody who might just step up and get out there.
I don't think you're off. I do. I think Judy's clearly Russell Wilson's favorite target with the most upside, right? And Cortland Sutton, though, is still having and getting his share of receptions, and he's in that 60 to 80 yards receiving category. He's not a receiver 1, but I think a solid receiver 2, or as some of these leagues will have a flex player, he could be that guy.
The first time in my life, I think I'm going to be rooting for Bill Belichick and the Patriots, who are playing the Dolphins this week in our next game. Because if the Patriots beat the Dolphins, and that's and Seattle beats the Jets, Steelers have a chance of getting into the playoffs. That's one of their own. That has to happen. Anyway, Dolphins and Patriots, big game for both teams. So I'm good with Stevenson, even Mac Jones, who we talked about, who we don't like anymore in New England, along with Kendrick Bourne and Jacoby Myers, who you've been pushing lately. And for the Finns, I like them all, including both running backs, Mostert and Wilson. Waddle and Bourne are a nice combo, along with Tua.
Well, now Tua's on this concussion protocol again, which may speak to some of those decisions he had made in that fourth quarter. So if he's out, which I think he will be, then you got Teddy Bridgewater, most likely back there throwing. But when it comes to the receivers in Miami, anybody can be throwing to those guys, and they're going to come up with yards and catches and touchdowns and everything else. But I think with New England, Kendrick Bourne has come on. Jacoby Myers is always kind of in the right place at the right time. And obviously, Ramondre Stevenson running the ball has been kind of their bread and butter this year and will continue to be.
Colts and Giants, Daniel Jones, you mentioned, is on fire. That means so is the rest of the team. I would take everybody on the Giants. I'm Colts, I'm not too sure.
Well, in New York, is kind of Cinderella-ish of a story this could be this year if they do make the playoffs. I still think the consistent fantasy points come from 2 guys, Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. In Indy, they're in total disarray now. And so they don't know who their quarterback's going to be. Zach Moss, of all people, has been their number 1 running back. And with no quarterback, the Colts simply don't have a passing game. And so there's really no real receiver options.
Usually I like Pittman, but you're right. There's, who's throwing to who, so Saints and Eagles, another important game with Chris Olave out and no one else stepping up. I do like Taysom Hill here. I think he's a good fantasy pick this week. Eagles, Minshew, Smith, Brown, Sanders. What's not to like?
Well, and the Eagles are back home for this one.
Yeah.
So you got Minshew, who's got his second start. Didn't play bad last week. Had a couple of errant throws, but will likely be back, and then he'll be playing in front of the Philly faithful. And then there's got a slew of weapons there in Philadelphia. And then they got one of the league's best play callers in Shane Steichen. And then you've been spot on with Taysom Hill really these last couple of years. And you're right. I mean, they really Olave's down, and Andy Dalton threw for under 100 yards last week. And so there's really not much they're doing offensively, although Alvin Kamara did have his second good game in a row, which he got in the end zone again for, and second game over a combined 100 yards rushing receiving. So possibly another option there in Kamara, and we'll see. But I think the Eagles, didn't show much step back, right? Even though Jalen Hurts wasn't a quarterback, Minshew might be the league's best backup quarterback because he's got quite an extensive number of starts in
Right.
this league.
Panthers at Bucks, Donta Foreman, Chuba Hubbard, DJ Moore. Can you believe these guys? Yes. Bucks, Fournette, Godwin, and Evans. That's it. No Brady.
Yeah, I'm with you with all the Panthers you named for two reasons. The high level of Carolina's offensive line blocking and the play of QB Sam Darnold lately, who, in addition to making good passing decisions, has become something of an effective runner in their run-pass option game. So for the Bucks, you're right. No way to anyone here except Fournette. And their passing game has really been relegated to 5 yards and shorter.
Yeah.
They can't pass protect to get the ball down the field. Brady can't read a defense anymore, nor can he throw the ball accurately. And so there's really, I agree with you. And so Fournette has been kind of not just the runner, but he's the guy who catches all the screens out of the backfield. He's the guy who gets the ball checked down to, which they don't have a passing game. So whoever does catch it, it's either a receiver screen or a check down. And so, combined, he went over 100 yards last game against the Arizona Cardinals, and could be another good option.
9 catches last week. That's a lot for a running back. Browns and Commanders. Watson is playing well enough. I like Cooper and Chubb. Commanders, just the regular guys: McLaurin, Dotson, Samuel, and Robinson. I like Robinson as a flex this week, not as an RB1 or 2.
Well, in the last 4 games that Watson's played, the results have not been good, not only for him, but for the offense. And the only guy really kind of consistently playing well for them offensively is Nick Chubb. And so Amari Cooper's numbers have been down. And Njoku's not really a factor anymore. And so there, to me, other than Nick Chubb, there's really not anybody to play or start fantasy-wise anyway in Cleveland. And then for the Commanders, I agree, though. I mean, Heineke has been better than good, better than Watson for sure. And there are 4 guys like Jerry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson that you mentioned, and then obviously Curtis Samuel. And I think, like you said, Robinson, I think, has just, since he's been back from what took him out to begin with, which was a couple gunshots to the leg, has been phenomenal.
Niners and Raiders. Kittle all day long. Brock Purdy and McCaffrey, keep them in there. Raiders, I like Josh Jacobs, and I like Hollis along with Renfro with Waller. Renfro seems to have found his way back. He didn't get enough targets this last week, but I think he's found his way back. And he's when he's on, I think he's just one of the best out there.
I agree with you. And to get to, one guy I'd mentioned, though, with 49ers who got left off, now that Deebo Samuel's out, Brandon Ayuk, who's had a solid season, had another good game and is obviously another great option there for the emerging star quarterback in Brock Purdy. And so the Raiders, right, Waller's back. Renfro provided a spark, although not a lot of yards or catches. Did get in the end zone. And the guy who fell off the planet, though, is Devontae Adams these last few games. And Carr has not been the same. And so it's really tough because Jacobs obviously did nothing against the Pittsburgh defense last week. I don't think he's going to do well against the Niners, who, to me, have the best defense in the league. And so, you're not left with much. Waller, I think, at tight end could be a spark. And like you said, if Renfro gets more involved, he could also.
Jets and Seahawks, well, 2 players is the entire game. The entire game, there's only 2 players I would have, and that's Seattle's Walker and Metcalf. And believe it or not, I'm light on Metcalf.
Well, I'll go. Okay, we'll talk about the Jets then. If Mike White is back, and it sounds like he's going to be, that brings Garrett Wilson back. And then if Corey Davis, who's been concussion protocol, if he plays, then he could also be a weapon. And then Mike White himself, who didn't have a bad game when he was starting, is now back from that rib injury. He could be a guy to bank on, especially if we're out of the buys now. And so, but when he was playing, there weren't a lot of quarterbacks putting up better numbers than him.
Vikings and Packers. Vikings, start him if you have them. Packers, I like Lazard to step up with Watson kind of ailing these days.
Well, with everything that has happened these last couple of weeks that the Packers needed to have happen in order to stay in playoff contention, and then they all did, this is where it all ends, because of all the wins that the Vikings have had this year, they've all been one-score games except for Week 1, where they actually, got beat the Packers down pretty well. And then, like you said, Lazard, though, is a guy that could step up now that Christian Watson may be out. He's, I guess, day to day. But when he does come back, if he does come back, he's going to have a hip injury that he's dealing with. And so, like you said, though, Minnesota, I mean, who wouldn't you start on that team right now? And so, I think this is the game, though, that the Vikings win. Packers are now eliminated from the playoffs, and then the Vikings keep going on.
Rams and Chargers. Wow. Check this out. Mayfield, Akers, and Higbee. Yeah, I said it. Mayfield, Akers, and Higbee. I can't believe I'm saying those three names, especially the first one. Chargers, the usual suspects, Herbert, Allen, Eckler, and Palmer.
Well, it's an intriguing matchup because the Chargers can't run the ball. And then the good news, though, is Herbert is back healthy, as is their entire crop of weapons who have been kind of in and out of the lineup this year. And so you've got that part. Then the Rams, on the other hand, Baker Mayfield is the guy that's all of a sudden turning this thing around. Well, no, not really. So you mentioned how, well, I'll mention it here. So he came in, he starts against the Raiders, or plays against the Raiders, and has this miraculous finish. Gets absolutely annihilated by the Packers, and then comes back and has the game of a lifetime against the Broncos. The issue with the two wins are those two teams have already made plans for the offseason. And so I think you got the Chargers now who are going to have Joey Bosa back, their best defensive player. I don't think the Rams running game is going to be what it was, certainly against the Broncos. Yeah. And that means that Baker Mayfield now no longer can just scoot around in the backfield, faking the outside zone, hitting a Higbee on a bootleg pass. That's not going to happen. He's going to actually have to play from the pocket, which the Chargers are actually been very good at collapsing without Joey Bosa. And so I don't see this game going well for the Rams. I think the Chargers, who've already clinched a playoff spot, because they're good and have been battling through injuries and overcoming some decisions by their head coach, I think now this game handily gets won by the Chargers.
Steelers and Ravens. Now, this is a Sunday night game. The Ravens have clinched. They're still without their quarterbacks and their sloppy quarterback play now. Steelers will know if they have a shot at the playoffs going into that game, because there'll be a couple of other games that make a decision for them. So it's going to be really kind of a weird game. I'm going with Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson, and George Pickens. In a stretch, I like Kenny Pickett here. And I like Kenny Pickett as a player in this game. Fantasy-wise, I don't very much, because he's just not putting up those kind of points that you need. And the Steeler defense. I love the Steeler defense coming off this last game. I love them for takeaways and sacks, because they're all of a sudden really generating those things. For the Ravens, I like Edwards and Dobbins both, and I like the defense there too.
Remember what this game used to be twice a year?
Oh, man, yes.
Right? Just a bludgeoning of both teams.
Yeah, you just hope to come out of it healthy,
Right. And so the first of two games Pitt has to win in order to assure a 17th consecutive winning season by Mike Tomlin. And you got Pickett to Pickens, who I think we can all see is going to be a great combination for many years to come. The Ravens also need to win, though, to stay in this race with Cincinnati for the division lead. But not much going on for Baltimore through the air, where it's now Gus Edwards is back and J.K. Dobbins. And I like you, though, I think the Dolphins, I think the Steelers have sort of a renewed sense of themselves and a certain pride that's come back last week especially. But throughout the season, they've battled in not great circumstances. They've gone through several quarterbacks, but yet Mike Tomlin's kind of the one that's held this team together. And now you've got, as you mentioned, Kenny Pickett, who's making good decisions and winning ball games on last minute drives. And so, who knows who's going to win, but fantasy wise, like you said, it's hard to really predict, because you got the Ravens defense that's been sort of suspect all year, the Steelers defense who's just coming alive. And so this is really a toss up as far as who's going to win and who's going to play well fantasy wise.
It's interesting. I saw a statistic the other day, and I hope I got it right. That I think it was at the end of the game. Pickett has had four la- uh, four game-winning drives in the last minute. He's only had 5 wins. you know, 5 wins in
Right?
a
So he
career.
just needs his back to the wall, and then we're all good.
Monday night, Bills and Bengals. I'm just going to say it easy. Anybody on either of these teams, you can start and feel good about success.
It's interesting. It's this matchup that makes the previous game we just talked about so intriguing, because now you've got the Bills playing the Bengals, who are actually in first place in the division, and it's last week in Chicago. It's the Bills that flipped the script on their game plan, where it really didn't have anything or much to do with Josh Allen and everything to do with a completely dominant performance. If we're talking just offense, they ran the ball down the Bears' throats, and it had nothing to do with Josh Allen. It was simply the offensive line crushing the defense and opening gaping holes for both Singletary and James Cook. And so now you've got Cincinnati. How do you game plan? Because all year long, for years, it's been Josh Allen. Well, now you got to take on an offensive line that can run the ball with or without Josh Allen. And then the play action game that now opens up for potentially deep downfield throws to both Diggs and Gabriel Davis kind of opens up a whole new ballgame. So how, if you're Cincy, do you prepare for that? Not quite sure. Cincinnati, who doesn't have a running game lately, no big deal, though, because Burrow's got like 12 fully loaded 6-shooters in each pocket. And so, it's like we mentioned, I mean, there's just no shortage of weapons for that guy.
All right, there you have it. Another edition of Kramer and Brill, 1 week away from the final weekend of the regular season. Find out more by going to our website, kramerandbrill.com, or my Bob Brill YouTube channel. For my friend and colleague Eric Kramer, I'm Bob Brill, and we will see you next time.